Well, for more on this now, let's cross to Mohammed Kaya in Mogadishu for the latest. Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us. It seems that President Biden is picking up from where his predecessors left off. Give us more details about this particular airstrike in Galkayo.
Well, that is correct, Lindy. U.S. Pentagon, the Defense Department, Pentagon has confirmed that it has carried out an airstrike against armed group Al-Shabaab, the first since President Joe Biden came to office. And this time round, the airstrike targeted Al-Shabaab militants in central state of Galmudug, near the city of Galkayo on Tuesday. And according to Pentagon statement, the airstrike was in support of the Somali security agencies who have been conducting security operations against Al-Shabaab in that part of the country. And also a statement from the Ministry of Defense, Somalia's National Army, said that 50 Al-Shabaab fighters, including 3 figures, were killed in this attack, which happened yesterday. And this is very significant because since January 19, for the past 6 months, when these airstrikes were absent, Al-Shabaab have been trying to carry an offensive attack against Somali armed forces, mainly in the Middle Shabelle region and also in the Lower Shabelle region, which they are very strong. Now, also important to note is that the Somali security agencies carried out operation against Al-Shabaab in the past 1 month alone, since they took the operations from lead operations from AMISOM, especially in the Hiran region, where they have captured several villages controlled by the armed group Al-Shabaab, and also in the Galmudug, where the airstrikes happened, whereby Somalia's army and also the regional forces have been conducting operations when Al-Shabaab tried to carry out a counterattack towards the regional's capital, Dusamareeb.
Well, thank you so much for that update. That's Mohammed Kaya in Mogadishu live there for us. And as we heard, at least 50 soldiers, or rather 50 fighters killed in that U.S. airstrike in Somalia. You are watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Now to the latest on the COVID-19 pandemic. Over half of Kenyan youth are hesitant to get COVID-19 vaccines. That's according to a recent study by the non-governmental organization AMREF Health Africa. The research found that a section of youth were waiting to see the effects of the vaccine on those who have received it before deciding whether or not to get inoculated. A separate study focusing on community health volunteers showed that 81% would accept a COVID-19 vaccine. Here's CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa with the details.
Persistent vaccine hesitancy continues to pose a global challenge even as countries across the world work to ensure more of their populations receive vaccinations against COVID-19. Vaccine hesitancy is a refusal or the delay in accepting vaccines. In the study conducted by the international health non-governmental organization AMREF Health, only 42% of youth in Kenya were ready to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Of those who were not ready to be vaccinated, 52% said they were waiting to see the effects of the vaccine on those who have received it. 6% were completely unwilling to receive the vaccine. A section of those rejecting the vaccine pointed to social media as their main source of information. A number of experts have blamed the slow uptake of vaccines in parts of Africa on concerns about safety and efficacy of the vaccines. However, it is difficult to quantify the impact of these factors on the vaccination process. Africa, whose 1.3 billion people represent 16% of the world's population, has administered about 57 million vaccine doses, and even where vaccines are available, persistent vaccine hesitancy remains a key barrier to achieving herd immunity through mass vaccination.
We know that in the control of this pandemic, vaccine hesitancy is the one thing that is going to delay our control of the pandemic, and especially in Africa, where the hesitancy seems to be higher than in other places.
In Malawi, health experts say skepticism about vaccines has played a role in the slow distribution and eventual expiration of doses. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, inoculation campaigns have been hampered by concerns about the rare blood clots related to the AstraZeneca vaccine. A separate study revealed that 81% of community health volunteers were willing to accept the vaccine and engage their communities about it. The remaining 19% cited concerns over the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine as their main reason for rejecting it. AMREF's study on vaccine hesitancy sought to assess Kenyan youth's perceptions of the COVID-19 vaccine as an entry point to planning a countrywide vaccination program. Experts now recommend measures which include designing robust communication about the COVID-19 vaccine in order to halt misinformation campaigns. Wilkisanyabwa, CGTN.
Meanwhile, COVID-19 cases are surging across Senegal. In an attempt to try and stop the spread of the virus, President Macky Sall has reimposed COVID-19 restrictions. The decision has forced a number of Senegalese to spend Eid al-Adha festivities away from their extended families. Nokutula Shabalala has more.
Senegal has recorded over 52,600 cases of COVID-19 and more than 1,200 deaths. That's according to the health ministry. Infections soared in the past week, threatening to overwhelm health services. President Macky Sall has put a limit on public gatherings and travel. The government urged people to continue with COVID-19 preventative measures of wearing masks and frequently sanitizing their hands. On the 21st of July, the country is celebrating Eid al-Adha, also known as Tabaski in Senegal. The holiday sees thousands of people come together for large family gatherings for the year's most anticipated feast. But with the increase in COVID-19 cases, this year, Pape Gueye has made the difficult decision to spend the first Eid al-Adha festivities apart from his 88-year-old mother.
I know a lot of people who had it. Some of them got through it, and some of them died. Those who don't believe in it don't know it. But after what I felt and the people around me who had it, I'll stay at home. I'll put my mask on.
But not everyone in Dakar was on the same page as Gueye on Monday. Parking lots and street corners were lined up with buses, their roofs loaded with luggage and sacrificial sheep. And inside, few passengers wore masks.
We take our precautions, but after staying so long without seeing your family members, your mother or your children, even if the COVID-19 situation is complicated, you will close your eyes and go. You'll put everything in God's hands because everything depends on Him. Everyone wonders if they will contract the disease there or if they will take it from there back to Dakar.
We give thanks. We are only afraid of God. We are not afraid of this disease.
Over 600,000 doses of vaccines have been administered to a Senegalese population of around 16 million people. Senegal has a limited supply of vaccines and is awaiting further deliveries of Sinopharm and Johnson & Johnson. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Europe has become the first region worldwide to record over 50 million coronavirus cases. A Reuters tally showed that the more contagious Delta variant drove the record surge in daily new infections. It added that Europe is seeing 1 million new cases about every 8 days and has reported around 1.3 million deaths since the pandemic began. Countries like France, the Netherlands and Greece have tightened or completed virus prevention measures to curb the outbreak, while others like the UK have loosened restrictions. The Delta variant has also spurred an increase in the daily pace of vaccinations in about a dozen countries. Well, staff in England's national health system could be offered a 3% pay rise, despite the government previously saying they could only afford 1%. Many health workers say it's still not enough for the efforts of frontline workers during this pandemic. Doctors and nurses have been protesting in London, demanding higher pay. Naveed Jabakal reports.
Dozens of doctors and nurses from across the UK have gathered here in London to march up to Downing Street, the Prime Minister's official residence. With them, they'll take a petition signed by more than 800,000 people calling for a 15% pay rise for health workers in England. In March, the government said all it could afford was a 1% increase. For many nurses, that would mean an extra few $100s a year. With inflation rising, that's effectively a pay cut. Following widespread criticism and an independent review of that decision, officials are now planning a 3% increase instead. But for many people here, that doesn't go far enough.
Because I've basically been living this situation from hospital to care home for the last 20 months. I know how hard the nurses have been working in the NHS.
We've lost 20% of our pay over the past decade. And after everything NHS workers have done in the pandemic, we believe we deserve better than this government is giving us.
You're talking about low-paid workers that are providing a professional service for people in this country, putting their lives on the line, medically qualified and stuff like that. And to be fair, the wages are never livable.
The Royal College of Nursing, which represents the sector, says staff should get a 12.5% pay rise, as many have had to go above and beyond, especially during the fight against COVID-19. But the pandemic has also led to unprecedented economic damage, with a pay freeze in place across the rest of the public sector. For many people here, though, the past year or so has been the most challenging and exhausting of their professional lives. And there appears to be a lot of public support for the protesters here too. A nationwide campaign clapping for healthcare workers became a weekly occurrence last year, drawing in hundreds of thousands of people. There's also the threat of strike action to consider. Unions representing doctors and nurses say they're willing to move ahead with stronger measures if their demands aren't met. With the virus once again spreading rapidly across the UK, this is a political decision that could have far-reaching consequences, not just for those directly impacted, but for the millions of others in the country who rely on the public health service. Naweed Jabakil, CGTN, London.
Well, let's turn to Nigeria now, where at least 30 people have died of cholera in Jigawa State in the northwest of the country. The disease has also claimed lives in other states over the past few weeks. CGTN's Tesem Akende has more from Jos.
The Ministry of Health in Jigawa State says those who died are patients who tested positive for the disease in 9 local government areas. 7 other cholera-related deaths were recorded in the country's southeastern state of Enugu. The Jigawa State government has directed the release of free drugs to treat the affected. The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, and a non-governmental organization, Doctors Without Borders, say they are ready to partner with the state to control the spread of the disease. So far, there have been more than 14,000 recorded cases of cholera in Nigeria between January and June this year, with 325 deaths recorded. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control has set up a multi-sectoral National Cholera Emergency Operations Center to ensure a coordinated, rapid and effective response to this outbreak. Tessam Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
New figures show that nearly 20,000 people in the DRC have had to flee their homes in the past 6 weeks because of violence in the east of the country. The United Nations Refugee Agency says attacks have been carried out by armed groups in the restive province of North Kivu. It's thought the ongoing insurgency has claimed the lives of hundreds of people. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
Attacks by armed groups in the DRC's eastern territory of Beni have displaced thousands of people since last month. The UN says nearly 20,000 people have been forced to flee to neighboring areas. Many of them are women and children. Congolese officials have blamed the attacks on a militia known as the Allied Democratic Forces. It's an Islamist group that's originally from neighboring Uganda. The UN Refugee Agency is calling on the international community to support the DRC government to protect its people.
There's a need for guns to be silenced in the DRC. And to the rest of the world, obviously, it's not just a question of funding, it's a question of sympathy and solidarity. And solidarity can be shown in so many other ways. So there's a lot that the international community can do as well.
In May this year, the DRC president placed 2 eastern provinces under military rule in an attempt to stop the violence. But attacks against civilians have continued in Ituri and North Kivu provinces. The UN says the illegal exploitation of minerals in those areas has fueled conflict for decades. The insecurity has made it difficult for humanitarian agencies to access the populations in need of assistance. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Coming up in your business news, up next. Tunisia secures $70 million in funding to support its economic recovery.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your business news, Tunisia has secured $70 million in funding from the African Development Bank to implement its economic recovery and social support programs. Tunisia is facing economic challenges compounded by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's turned to international lenders to back its battered economy and vaccination campaign. From Tunis, here's Adnan Chouachi with the details.
Tunisia's pandemic-battered economy has received a shot in the arm after an approval of a credit facility by the African Development Bank. The announcement follows the meeting in May between Tunisian President Kais Saied and the AFDB president, who pledged support for the North African state during its post-COVID-19 recovery. The AFDB president also noted that Tunisia needs to implement several structural reforms in order to achieve inclusive growth.
For this year, the African Development Bank will strongly support Tunisia with a $270 million funding. $70 million will be dedicated to the positive support of the Tunisian state. We discussed the importance of inclusive growth and job creation for youths during this period.
Tunisian Social Affairs Minister has welcomed the funding and said it will support the economic recovery process by improving the investment climate, preserving employment, and promoting social inclusion through new mechanisms to address social challenges exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic.
This funding will allow us to support the sectors and the economic activities most affected by the pandemic and the lockdown measures since May 2021. The successive general lockdowns have paralyzed many businesses and caused unprecedented layoffs.
Authorities in Tunis added that the objective of the program is to improve the efficiency of social spending by streamlining social assistance programs and adopting a more targeted approach to beneficiary populations.
Even the citizens who do not have social security will benefit from this financial support. We are aware that tens of thousands of people lost their source of income and were unable to find new jobs. The crisis is affecting all social classes and categories.
The funding from the Abidjan-based Landa will also support 230,000 employees threatened by layoffs and who are exposed to technical unemployment to preserve their jobs or provide them with social assistance. 1.4 million microcredit applicants will also be able to access banking services thanks to the program. According to the African Development Bank, mitigating the socio-economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and supporting a more sustainable and inclusive economic recovery are the AFDB's priorities to help Tunisia emerge from the current economic and social crisis. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Zimbabwe's Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube said the government has deferred by a year payment of the first tranche of compensation to white farmers who lost their land. He blamed the setback on the impact of COVID-19 and delays in finding a financial advisor. Last year, the government agreed to pay half of the $3.5 billion compensation by end of July and the rest over 5 years to farmers whose land was expropriated by the government to resettle black families. Compensating the farmers is seen as an important step in resolving one of the most divisive policies of the Robert Mugabe era and improving ties with the West. Zimbabwe's government has set aside $23.5 million in this year's budget as relief payment to distressed farmers. Well, over in neighboring South Africa, mid-month data from the Central Energy Fund indicates that petrol is set for an increase of 87 South African cents a litre, diesel 58 cents and paraffin 56 cents. The Automobile Association says it expects little respite before month end. CGTN's Angela Coppola tells us more.
The Automobile Association notes that while the slight hiccup in the supply of fuel will not push the price of fuel higher, the key driver of fuel price hikes is the weakening rand.
Fuel prices were already trending higher before the widespread looting and unrest that beset South Africa a couple of days ago. The rand-US dollar exchange rate spiked at one point from 14 Rand 35 to nearly 14 Rand 80 since the 12th of June. And really, it's the increase in the value of the dollar against the rand, in other words, the weakening of the rand against the dollar, and this subtle increase of the oil price over the same period.
There was some concern that the unrest and arson on the main highways between KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng would lead to shortages at fuel stations. Added to which, SA Petroleum Refiners in Durban, which supplies 35% of South Africa's refined fuel, had declared force majeure and told its retail customers it wouldn't supply fuel until it was safe to do so.
It had an impact on the delivery of goods. It didn't have a major impact on the delivery of fuel in the sense that there were reserves in Gauteng to cater for that. And hopefully now that it's been reopened, normal procedure will return where goods, fuel and other cargo is delivered according to plan.
South Africa has another challenge. Diesel is used extensively to move goods and materials around the country.
Road is probably about 90% of all land transport in South Africa, and that relies on diesel. And even our trains, because the overhead electricity cables are often stolen, rely on diesel.
The price increase will have a material impact on the country's economy.
So any big increase in the diesel and in the petrol prices has a big bearing on the South African economy. So we expect a 5% increase to have a 0.2% increase in the total inflation rate directly, indirectly another 0.2% over the next year or so.
This latest in the series of fuel price increases is going to affect everyone, from consumers all the way to manufacturers and suppliers of goods and services. It's going to increase the price of everything. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Sudan is seeking debt relief so that it can open up its lines of credit with multilateral organizations and other countries, which will allow it to receive new grants and loans at low or zero interest. The cash-strapped nation badly needs the financing to overcome its prolonged economic crisis. Here's more from CGTN's Enoch Sokolia.
For years now, Sudan's state budget has been deep in the red amid crippling shortages of basic commodities, extended power outages, and soaring inflation. So a debt relief is a crucial step for Sudan in its attempt to recover from a deep economic crisis and re-enter the global economy after decades of isolation. The African country sits in a volatile region between the Horn of Africa and North Africa. Its total debt as of the end of 2019 was at least $50 billion, according to the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Sudan is still working with creditors to reconcile its debt up to the end of last year. $5.6 billion is owed to multilateral organizations, including the World Bank and the African Development Bank. An estimated $19 billion is owed to Paris Club creditors, of whom France, Austria and the United States are the largest. A similar amount is owed to non-Paris Club countries, including Kuwait, which is Sudan's largest creditor at $9.8 billion, Saudi Arabia, and China. Sudan also holds an unusual high amount of debt to commercial lenders, estimated at least $6 billion. So what measures can the African country employ to have the loan reduced? Efforts to address the escalating debt began in the late 2020 after Sudan was removed from the U.S. state sponsors of terrorism list. Then Sudan became eligible for the Highly Indebted Poor Countries HIPC program, which provides debt relief for low-income nations. Tackling Sudan's debt through the HIPC program has been swift, with creditors agreeing to restructure and forgive debt. Indeed, the African country will be seeking relief from wealthy Gulf Arab nations, aiming to get as much as 60% of Sudan's $30 million debt owed to these countries written off. The announcement late Sunday by Finance Minister Jibril Ibrahim came after cash-strapped Sudan received a $14.1 billion debt relief from the Paris Club of Creditor Nations last week. Ibrahim said Khartoum would also ask Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait to reschedule Sudan's remaining debt for 16 years. The talks, he added, would also focus on a 6-year grace period for debt payments. Sudan is in a fragile transition to democracy following a 2019 popular uprising that led to the military's ouster of longtime President Omar al-Bashir. Enoch Sokolia, CGTN.
Tanzania says it's forming a national blockchain and cryptocurrency task force that will advise the government on the use of the technology. The East African nation's ICT Commission has been given 14 days to set up a team that will fast-track the process. And as CGTN's Daniel Kijo now reports, the move comes after Tanzania's president signaled an interest in the adoption of cryptocurrencies.
Tanzania wants to join the blockchain and cryptocurrency revolution. The Information and Technology Minister Dr. Ndungulile is forming a task force to research the issue and present its findings to the government. The first order of business for the committee is to identify national priorities.
The task force will also advise on policy and strategic legal and regulatory issues that we need to work on so that we can fast-track this revolution we want to do.
Gideon started trading cryptocurrency in 2018. He says being one of the first Tanzanian companies in the sector meant he faced many challenges.
And by then, it was not easy even to register a company dealing with cryptocurrency, but this time around, it is just like it is acceptable to register, though still we don't have clear laws that regulate cryptocurrency, by the way.
Bitcoin is a digital currency that exists without a central bank or single administrator. Some experts say since crypto exchanges and cryptocurrencies are a new market, there are gaps that make them ideal for money laundering. Despite the risk, Tanzania's president feels it's better to be prepared. She urged the Bank of Tanzania to prepare and study the cryptocurrency scenario around the world.
It's wise to start working on this technology to just get ourselves ready, so that when it comes in full force, we will be ready. Because we may feel the country is not ready, but our citizens may already be using those systems.
The task force will also advise on a public awareness campaign to educate the public on both blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. Tanzania's central bank had banned cryptocurrencies in November of 2019, saying they were not recognized by Tanzanian laws. But it now says it is adapting following the president's comments. It has not revealed exactly what steps it is taking or when it will reverse that ban. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
A report by rights group Human Rights Watch says the Kenyan government's cash transfer program that aimed to cushion vulnerable people against COVID-19 was crippled by irregularities. President Uhuru Kenyatta announced a $93 million program back in May 2020, 2 months after the East African nation entered a strict lockdown. CGTN's Asta Tal explores the findings of that report.
When Kenya confirmed its first COVID-19 case in March 2020, among other measures it put in place to cushion its citizens was a $93 million nationwide cash transfer program that ran between April and November. A 66-page report by Human Rights Watch, however, now says that only a small fraction of vulnerable families in the country benefited from the program. According to the New York-based rights group, by October last year, of the 600,000 households living in Nairobi's 8 informal settlements, just 29,000 were enrolled in the cash transfer program.
When the coronavirus came, we experienced so many problems because there was just no money.
Human Rights Watch also found that the COVID-19 crisis has devastated many livelihoods since the pandemic hit. It says thousands of individuals and families who lost their only source of income with business closures and job losses face the threat of hunger and possible eviction.
This one I'm selling for 18 cents and the other one in the jerrycan goes for $3. Whenever you're ready, you can choose either.
Although some of Kenya's containment measures have remained in place for over a year, cash transfers and tax relief ended last December.
I am a casual domestic worker. Because of the nature of my job, I can't get any work. I would just boil water and go to sleep with my kids.
Kenya's economy is projected to grow by 4.5% in 2021. It contracted by 0.1% last year. The pandemic has dampened most drivers of demand with private consumption, which is usually the driver of domestic demand in Kenya, now estimated to have slowed markedly in 2020. That's as households reduce spending amid job and income losses. So far, Kenya has recorded over 192,000 infections and 3,775 coronavirus-related deaths since the pandemic began. Asta Tal, CGTN.
Coming up in your sports news. The